Well, in that regard, based on what you all have seen now, and I don't know if you're doing this analysis or not, is there any feeling that in terms of looking at what people are asking for and then getting, are you seeing that people are coming in with grandly inflated views of what they should get, or are they getting right about what they should get?
Oh, no. What I'm seeing is, and I've seen it from the very beginning, the huge disconnect between what people and businesses request and what they document. Now, there may be businesses, I'm the first to admit it, there are businesses in Pensacola that asked for X and should have got X and instead got Y. It's a problem. Not all the businesses, but those are the businesses in that room today, see. And it doesn't take a whole lot of businesses that have been legitimately underpaid to cause all sorts of questions about the program. I understand that. But if you really want to see the disconnect, see the total amount requested by a business or an individual and what they document.
How are they?
For example, I have two individuals, this is just a blatant example, two individuals filed a claim asking for $20 billion and $10 billion. Well, it's a joke,
right.
But I mean, that's a real problem. The gap between wishful thinking and documented loss.
Well, what you see in Pensacola, for instance, is a lot of people saying, at least the early figures indicated, as we were going into this summer season, people were anticipating that this was finally going to be a really good recovery year. Of course, then it was cut short. So are people coming in and saying, well, this is what the figures say, but I was really anticipating 20% more?
Yes.
And then how do you look at that and say, well, that's not real, or that's a reasonable assumption?
You try and determine whether or not it's a reasonable assumption based on the best data you can get about what's a valid assumption. Don't forget, in this county, in 5 months, just this county, we've paid out about $140 million to about 12,000 people and individuals. Now, I get hammered all the time. Well, that's the aggregate number, but if you look at this mom and pop, or that store, or that business, I mean, that, doesn't tell the story for that individual. But, I agree with that. But I do cite the aggregate numbers for the county for the proposition I'm doing something right.
Well, just for the sake of argument, if you paid out $170 million and the actual losses were $200 million, then you could say, well, we're really behind where we ought to be.
You could. But that's far different than saying the GCCF is a disaster, it didn't work, it is a failure. And we ought to we ought to do it a better way. Be careful what you wish for.
Do you model for that kind of anticipated earning for 2010? Do you model individually? For example, Pensacola Beach might be different than Dolphin Island in Alabama?
We don't model for that. What we do is we recognize that there may be, at the end of the day, notwithstanding the generic methodology, we may have to have modifications to that methodology in individual cases involving proximity, industry, things like that.
Do you know who Rick Harper is?
No.
Okay. He's the head of the University of West Florida School of Business, and he is really the state's go-to guy about financially what's happening in Pensacola. He testifies before the legislature. He has modeled that. He has modeled what the expected earnings were going into 2010. So my question is, why not use that resource?
Why not? For all I know, we have.
Okay.
I would have to go back and find out for this editorial board that the people we've been using, the experts, and again, I said today at the meeting, I have no vested interest in 2 years or 4 years and what's the damage to Pensacola versus Dolphin Island. I'm agnostic on the experts. I want the best expert input I can get. For all I know, our people in proposing this methodology, how to go forward with final, talked to Hopper or looked at what he did. But I think that if we haven't, absolutely we should. And one thing I'm hoping is during this public comment period that's underway now, has Hopper submitted for public comment and review his thoughts on what's wrong with the methodology? I would hope you'd get Hopper to do that. We'd engage Hopper. I think that would be in the public interest.
Can you walk me through the program that you just announced, the 2-year earnings, and then less some other things? Just
basically what we said was that for purposes of determining option 1, a final payment, what we propose for the next 2 weeks as a possible methodology, subject to review and public comment from hundreds or thousands of people and experts, we will take your 2010 loss from May until December. We'll take your loss. The spill, the rig blew up in April. We can't cover your losses in January, February, and March. In April, there was no spill-related loss. We'll take the loss that you've documented. We will double it. We will give you that loss for 2011 and 2012.
That doubled loss.
Double loss. If your loss was...
So theoretically, does that cover the anticipated growth?
Theoretically, that's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Then we will deduct, this is at least for the now, the proposed methodology, whatever you've received so far to ameliorate your damage. And that difference, here's a check. Now, it's 4 times your loss if you're oyster harvesting, because we are told that oyster harvesting, they can't swim from the oil, they're sort of stuck, and the damage will be that much longer to recover.
I'm sorry, please go.
Just one other point.
Yeah.
If an individual claimant thinks that I'm not being generous with that formula, notwithstanding I'm relying on what I've been told, don't do it. Instead, take an interim payment, document your damage for the last quarter. No release, no murky future. Keep coming back every quarter, document your damage, and we'll pay it. And 90,000 claimants have requested a final payment. 44,000 claimants have requested an interim payment. And 90,000 claimants took the quick payment. 5,000 for an individual, 25,000 for a business. You claimants, each one of you decide what you want to do. I really don't care as long as you take one of those 3 options. That's my goal.
Okay.
I find the segregation of the oyster harvesters interesting because everything else, nothing else, as far as my understanding, is designated as anything, any other calculation other than the 200% or the 2 years. But yet it seems like, I mean, I understand that oysters are a unique thing. They don't move, and so they're dependent on the water. But, might you also think that, a fisherman, of a regular type fisherman versus a hotel owner versus a restaurant, it seems like how can you be so sure that that formula is going to fit all of those people equally?
You can't be sure of any of this. You can't be sure. But for you to say, I'm just using it as an example. How can everybody be the same? Well, why not? That's what I'm told. Now, I'm not making this up.
Right.
If somebody comes to me and says fishermen should be 3 years, hotels 2 years, hotels in Pensacola 2 years, hotels in Tampa 1 year, fine with me. It's not my money, and I'm just trying to get the money out based on a principle that can be justified. And if I'm not right, then tell me, Dean Hopper write me a letter and say, be careful. You write me a letter and say, be careful. I'm perfectly willing to do that.
So that would be an appropriate thing to submit during the comment
Absolutely.
period with some substantiation.
We have received so far hundreds of posted reactions to the methodology. We'll revisit this, we'll look it over, we'll decide.
330, I just got the press release.
There it is.
Yeah.
Now, one problem we've got, I'll just tell you right now, because you guys will be eventually writing about it. Can you document your damage? I'm worried that people who want an interim payment for December, January, and February. What have you got? Show me. I'll pay it. But don't just come in and say, give me 3 months worth of damage. I mean, what? Show me. I mean, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the documentation. Just as you said at the very beginning, if I had made mistakes. From the day one of this program, I've been concerned about the documentation. This is unique. This program, there's never been anything quite like it. And I've denied more claims than I've paid. You guys should take a look. I got 100,000 claims where there was no documentation. Zero. Well, it's a problem.
We've heard a lot, and particularly in Louisiana, maybe some in Alabama too, of people pretty much operating on a cash economy. Have you seen much of that here?
Yes.
And how are you dealing with that if you do?
I've seen that. I think it's fair to say everything's relative. I've seen it everywhere. And how do you deal with it is by denying the claim. Trying to tell them, give me something. There's nothing illegal about a cash business.
Right.
There's absolutely nothing illegal about a cash business. But I've had people document their claim. And when you tell them they're going to get a 1099, they withdraw the claim. They actually withdraw the claim.
Do you think the process would have been better if you had it transparent and everybody's claim was public record? And
No.
so, why not? We would know who was faking it. You would learn a lot better who was legit. And who
Here's the
wasn't.
problem with that. The minute you're bringing sunlight and disclosure as to the circumstances of every claim, people won't file. If they think that their confidential proprietary information is going to be in the public sector, instead of 500,000 claims, you'll have a huge lesser number. People do not want anybody to know their business. And I found that in every one of these programs. I found it in 9/11, Virginia Tech, Agent Orange. Confidentiality of personal and proprietary data is critical to getting people to access the program.
But to pass on, the Senator Gates is talking about filing a suit along those very same lines to make it more transparent in that regard.
Senator who?
Gates, he's a
State senator.
Yeah. The other thing, talk back about 9/11. You get a lot of criticism when you first were involved in 9/11.
First year.
First year. How is the criticism 9/11 compared to the criticism here?
Pretty emotional, both.
Yeah.
We turned it around after a year in 9/11, and I'm hoping and confident we'll turn around the criticism with the GCCF. In the GCCF criticism, I must say, I see, relatively speaking, a relatively modest number of businesses. I don't see a lot of criticism from individuals. I see it coming from a relatively modest but important segment of the local community and the business side. And it's a problem. We have to try and deal with it. And I said today we would.